I am going to blow your mind with a very realistic path for LSU to make the college football playoff this year. You got to hear it. It's Locked on LSU. Let's go.
You are Locked on LSU, your daily podcast on the LSU Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Okay, let's get it. It is Locked on LSU, your team every day. I'm your host, Matt Moscona. Thanks for making us your first listen every day. We are free, available wherever you get podcasts, of course, on YouTube as well. So please subscribe. And remember, one of the best ways to help us grow is to leave your comments below. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. We'll turn the page to LSU in Florida. Garrett Dellinger, will he play against the Gators? If he doesn't, how big of a loss is that? Will Florida quarterback DJ Lagway play against the Tigers? We have an update from his mother. You'll hear that here shortly. But I have to start with something that I admit, if you see the thumbnail, the title of this episode, you are probably thinking this is stupid clickbait. I get it. And I would probably think the same thing. But I promise you, this is not clickbait. This is very real. And LSU has a really manageable path to the college football playoff this year. Let me give you some background, okay? Many of you know, or you may know, that I host a daily radio show on ESPN Radio in Baton Rouge and syndicated throughout Louisiana. And on Tuesday, I was sitting down thinking, okay, there's a mathematical shot for LSU to make the college football playoff. Let me map out exactly what needs to happen, who needs to beat who, et cetera. No matter how far-fetched it is, just so I can tell my audience here, this is exactly what you need to cheer for. Thinking this is not in any way, it's going to be 15 things that need to happen sideways and upside down and left and right. It's not really going to happen, but let's map it out. And so I sat down to do this exercise. And what I stumbled upon absolutely floored me, to the point where I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop on myself. I keep waiting for someone to message me and say, no, Scone, you got this wrong. And I just don't think that I do. Y'all, there is a really clear path for LSU to win a, wait for it, 6-team tiebreaker to make it to the SEC championship game and ultimately the college football playoff if they win there. So let me start by this. When LSU lost to Alabama to fall to 6-3 overall, their opportunity to make the college football playoff as an at-large team went out the window. There is no realistic scenario that I can imagine where LSU gets an at-large berth. Okay. So their only way to the playoff would be to win the SEC. If you know how this works out, the college football playoff, the top 4 conference champions get automatic berths and a bye in the college football playoff. Matt, get to the point. They're not going to win the SEC. Hold on. So for that context, a team like Notre Dame, for example, can never get a bye in the playoff because they don't play in a conference. Notre Dame could be ranked number 1 in the country. The highest they could ever be seeded is 5th. LSU could be ranked 25th. If they win the SEC, they're going to get a top 4 seed and a bye. You follow? It's not about ranking. It's about seeding. And the top 4 conference champs get a top 4 seed and a bye. So I set out to map out what LSU would need to have happen to end up in the SEC championship game. So ultimately, they would have to get to Atlanta and win the SEC to make the playoff. The first thing that needs to happen is that LSU would have to win out. Now, given how LSU's played the past 6 quarters, 5.5 quarters, it's hard to just definitively say, yep, that's going to happen. But the Tigers opened as a touchdown favorite on the road against Florida. They might be facing the number 3 quarterback. Very winnable game. You come home against Vanderbilt. I'm as worried as you about Diego Pavia, a running quarterback, but you're going to be favored and should win that game. South Carolina, who you beat, just blew out Vanderbilt. And then you play Oklahoma, who's got a good defense, but has really struggled offensively. That game is in Baton Rouge, and you could be playing for a playoff spot. So you should win those 3. Work with me and say hypothetically you do. You get to 9-3 overall and 6-2 in the SEC. Well, what you need to have happen is a logjam of 6-2 teams in the conference. And in order for that to happen, Georgia needs to beat Tennessee this weekend. So this is one of the things you're pulling for outside of LSU winning out. If Georgia beats Tennessee, that means both Georgia and Tennessee would have 2 conference losses. Okay, so now Tennessee has 1 loss presently. If they were to lose to Georgia, they'd have 2 losses. So the only 1-loss teams left in the SEC would be Texas and Texas A&M, who play, of course, in the final weekend of the regular season. The winner of that game would go to Atlanta as the only 1-loss team in the league. The loser would fall into that group of 2-loss teams. And what happens then is you start to figure out the tiebreakers. Now, this could get less complicated if Alabama slipped. Alabama's got to play at Oklahoma, and they have to play Auburn. Now, I don't think Alabama's going to lose either of those games, but Alabama was in a dogfight at home against South Florida. They were in a dogfight at home against South Carolina. They lost at Vanderbilt. They lost at Tennessee. I get it. They looked very impressive against LSU, but there have been more oftentimes this season than not that Alabama has looked unimpressive than impressive. So it would be way easier if Bama lost, but there's a path with Bama winning out and finishing 6-2 in the league as well, because what would happen is if you had Texas or Texas A&M as a 1-loss team, for the sake of argument here, let's say Texas A&M wins at home and beats Texas. LSU, Georgia, Ole Miss, Alabama, Tennessee, Missouri, I'll come back to them in a second, and Texas, those 7 teams would all be 2-loss teams in conference. Now, you need, very likely, Arkansas to beat Missouri. But, again, I'll explain that further in a second. So follow me here. You've got 1 loss, Texas A&M, who beat Texas in the SEC championship, and now you have 6 or 7 teams all at 6-2 in the league. Well, how do you determine which team among those 6 or 7 advance? The first tiebreaker is head-to-head among the tied teams. That doesn't play because it would have to be head-to-head among all the tied teams, and they didn't all play each other. So you could say, well, Matt, LSU lost to Alabama. It doesn't matter. LSU also beat Ole Miss. Well, Ole Miss beat Georgia. Well, Georgia beat Texas, and so on. You understand. So that doesn't work. The next is the record against all common conference opponents among the tied teams. Well, the teams I mentioned don't have a common conference opponent, meaning where all of the teams I mentioned all played the same team or teams. So the next is the record against the highest placed common conference opponent in the conference standings. Again, you don't have a scenario where all of the teams I just mentioned all played one or multiple teams. So you go to the 4th tiebreaker, which is cumulative conference winning percentage of all conference opponents among the tied teams. Let me say this in a more simplified way. Take LSU. You'd look at LSU's 8 SEC opponents. You'd look at their win-loss record. You total that up and take the winning percentage. You would do the same for every other tied team. Whoever's opponents have the highest winning percentage, advance. And what if I told you by a wide margin? The answer is LSU. As of today, LSU's opponents in conference play are 26-24 with a .520 winning percentage. The next closest team is Georgia, whose opponents are 21-27 with a winning percentage of .437. A&M at .434, Ole Miss at .431, Missouri at .428, Texas at 400, Tennessee at 380. Not only is LSU leading, they're leading by a wide margin, an insurmountable margin by any of the teams that I just mentioned. The one caveat is Alabama. So if Alabama loses, it makes things much easier. But if Alabama wins out and finishes 6-2, they're in this group as well. Now, LSU and Alabama each have an identical .520 winning percentage among their opponents. LSU's opponents are 26-24. Alabama's are 25-23. So how do you break that tie? Well, it's not a head-to-head, and you're not actually breaking the tie. You have 3 more weeks of football. It's this simple. You need teams that Alabama played to lose and teams that LSU played to win. And the game it would come down to, for all intents and purposes here, would be Missouri against Arkansas. If Arkansas, who LSU played, beats Missouri, who Alabama played, then LSU would overtake Alabama and hold that 4th tiebreaker, even if Alabama wins out. So to summarize, if LSU wins out, if Georgia beats Tennessee at home, which, by the way, they're a 10-point favorite, and if Arkansas beats Missouri, LSU would play the winner of Texas A&M in Atlanta for the SEC championship and a right to make the college football playoff. And can you imagine the melt in Tuscaloosa if that happened? Oh God, let it be so. I got to get your reaction. Please drop your comments. It is Locked on LSU, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. I love the Game Time app. And after what I just told you, if that doesn't motivate you to get down to the Swamp this weekend or to get to Tiger Stadium for the Vanderbilt game or the Oklahoma game to push the Tigers through to a 9-3 record and 6-2 in conference play, I don't know what possibly could. Download the Game Time app. If it's sports, music, theater, comedy, if you love being at live events, Game Time makes that happen. They got the all-in pricing feature. You got to turn that feature on, but when you toggle, it'll show you the total up front with no surprise fees at checkout. You can get a panoramic seat view from your seat in the app before you buy, and I love the lowest price guarantee, where Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time picks. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem with the code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. Well, for LSU to make the playoff, the first thing they got to do is win 3 more games. That starts Saturday in Gainesville against the Gators. And that's no easy task, although Florida has had their struggles this year, no doubt. But that's a Florida team that's been resilient despite its struggles at the start. They have rallied to find themselves a bit of respectability. Now, they're 4-5 right now is Florida, but they've lost 2 in a row. They lost the neutral site game against Georgia, and then they lost at Texas this past weekend. But after a disappointing season opening, lost to Miami, they beat Samford, they lost to Texas A&M on their home field. Then they got it going. Nice road win at Mississippi State. A blowout win, a comfortable win, I should say, at home against Central Florida. A close loss to Tennessee where, my goodness, did they have a chance to win that one in overtime. They beat Kentucky 48-20 before losing the last 2 weeks to Georgia and Texas. So not an easy ask for LSU to go down Gainesville and win, but something that is doable for the Tigers, who go into this game at 2:30 Central Time on ABC right now as a 4-point favorite. It opened at 7, and that line has come down. Obviously, there's a lot of odds makers not so much believing in the Tigers. Now, a big part of that, of course, has been LSU's inability at times to run the football and some struggles on the offensive line. That was magnified this past weekend against Alabama when Garrett Dellinger missed the game. You all know Garrett Dellinger. He's been your starting left guard for 3 years. He's a 4-year player. He's played in 41 games with 30 career starts. He had that tightrope procedure on his ankle, which kind of became made famous by Tua back in the 2019 LSU-Alabama game. And Dellinger's fighting his way back. And Brian Kelly did give an update on Dellinger, but he was also asked about Paul Mabenga. Now, Paul Mabenga is the second-year player that replaced Garrett Dellinger against Alabama, and Kelly was asked how Mabenga did against the Tide.
Yeah, I thought Paul did some good things. You know, he moves his feet very well. His insertion into the lineup for a first-time starter, we were pleased with what he did, and I think he's only going to improve from that experience. Garrett will go out and run today, and we'll get a better sense of where he's at after today's workout.
Okay, let me give you a little bit of context. Now, I do respect very much that Brian Kelly is supporting Paul Mabenga, going to bat for his guy, so to speak, and you don't really have an option. However, Paul Mabenga, when we look at Pro Football Focus, was the lowest graded player. Not the lowest graded offensive lineman, not the lowest graded offensive player. The lowest graded player on the team after the Bama game. His pass blocking grade was a 27. His run blocking grade was a 40.5. His overall grade was a 42.1. That's not good at all. We could look at the most pivotal play of the game, which was Garrett Nussmeier's fumble. LSU gets the stop on 4th and 1. It's a 14-6 game. It's a one-score game. You get the ball with 3 minutes to go before half, and on first down, Garrett Nussmeier sacked and fumbled. Well, yes, it was DJ Chester who allowed that sack, but Chester was moving inside to his left toward Mabenga to give help when he didn't see the blitzer coming in, Jihad Campbell coming in to his right. It's fair to ask, what if Garrett Dellinger's there? Maybe Chester's not moving inside to give help. Maybe he felt like he had to because he was giving Mabenga help. Maybe it was a communication issue that wouldn't have arisen if Dellinger were there. Don't know. It's purely speculative, but that was a massive play, and it did involve the interior of your offensive lineman and of your offensive line, and you were missing your best interior lineman. If there's a silver lining, it's this. It's that Florida's defense is the worst defense you're going to have faced all year. And I know last week we talked about Alabama being the worst run defense that LSU has faced all year. And LSU had success literally from the second play of the game where they ran for 45 yards. But you got behind, and it was a struggle to run after that. I mean, you were throwing to play catch-up. As bad as Alabama was statistically, Florida's worse. Florida is 100th nationally in total defense. They are 90th in pass defense. Florida is 93rd against the run, 167 yards a game. They're 89th in scoring defense. They're 54th in sacks and 78th in TFLs. This is just not a good defense. It is statistically the worst defense at every level that LSU will have faced all year. Now, I understand you still have to go on the road to the Swamp and play the Gators, who have some talented players on that field. Not a lot, but they have some talented players in that field, and it is still a road conference game. And you went on the road to Texas A&M and did not fare well. This is a road challenge in the league, but one that you should be able to handle if you protect the football and you play more competent defense than you did the last 5.5 quarters. A big part of playing competent defense is going to be who's under center for the Gators. I'm going to talk about that as we wrap up next. Locked on LSU, your team every day. By now we know that LSU's biggest struggle is facing a running quarterback. That is objectively true. We saw it with the Lenore Sellers. We saw it with Marcel Reed. We saw it this past weekend, of course, with Jalen Milroe. And we could look to the great performance they had against Taylor Green in Arkansas, but that more and more looks like the outlier. Green was coming off a knee injury. Jaquindon Jackson had an ankle injury and left that game, near halftime. It's fair to say, with a growing sample, what happened against Arkansas is the exception, not the rule. The rule has been your inability to tackle and defend against running quarterbacks. Well, Graham Mertz is the veteran quarterback at Florida who's done for the year due to injury. His college career, unfortunately, is over. He was replaced by DJ Lagway. Lagway was a 5-star number 1 quarterback in the country. He's a true freshman at Florida this year. Well, 2 weeks ago against Georgia in the cocktail party, Lagway was running the ball. He went to the turf, grabbed his hamstring. It was injured so severely that he had to be carted off the field. Lagway did not play this past weekend against Texas. That honor, I suppose you could say, went to a Yale transfer quarterback, Aiden Warner. Aiden Warner, to his credit, went out there and gave it his all. But he did not have a fantastic day against Texas. He was 12 of 25 passing for 132 yards, no touchdowns, and 2 interceptions, and he carried 3 times for -7 yards. Of course, those are not sack adjusted. So DJ Lagway, although he's a freshman, gives Florida a much better chance to play well and to win if he can go. But it is a big ask to watch a young man get carted off the field on a Saturday and 14 days later be able to give it a go against LSU. Now, Nikita Lagway is DJ Lagway's mother. And she was on a podcast where she was asked on the Stadium and Gale podcast, where she was asked, and by the way, it wasn't just Nikita Lagway, it was also DJ Lagway's agent, which is, you're going to hear 2 voices here. You're going to hear the agent first and then Nikita Lagway, DJ's mother. They asked Nikita Lagway for an update on DJ Lagway coming off the injury 2 weeks ago against Florida and not playing, 2 weeks ago against Georgia, not playing against Texas, and how he's doing heading into this weekend. The first voice you're going to hear is DJ Lagway's agent, then his mother, Nikita Lagway. Give a listen.
No comment from me.
Yeah, I don't know. I was freaking out when I saw him out there warming up because he had already told me that he wasn't going to play. And then my youngest, I was like, Mom, look at him. He's geared up. And I was like, oh my gosh. And so, but my professional trade, I'm a physical therapist. Even though they don't respect me as a physical therapist, they only see me as mama. But I'm a physical therapist. So I've always told them, listen to your body will tell you. And so that's always been really big with me to tell my boys to pay attention to your bodies. And I say, don't rush it, don't push it, but they are competitors. And I know that competitive part. So everything in him wants to play.
So DJ Lagway's mother is saying that everything in her son wants to play. He's a competitor. But he was carted off the field 2 weeks ago. His hamstring was so injured he couldn't even walk off the field. A week later, they played Texas, and he dressed against Texas. But to be clear, he's from the state of Texas. They had a lot of family at that game, and so he wanted to be in uniform. Totally respect that, but he didn't play. Keep getting treatment. Now, 2 weeks removed from the injury, he's going to play against LSU. If you are an LSU fan, you are looking at one column only, and that is DJ Lagway's rushing totals by game this season. Is he a dynamic runner? Flatly, no. Not yet in his career anyway. He's got some great ability and might eventually be that. He's 6'3", 240. He's a big-bodied guy who has that in him, but certainly hasn't shown the ability yet. Against Miami, 4 carries for 20 yards. Against Samford, 5 for 16. Against A&M, 4 for -20. Against Mississippi State, 3 for 22. Against Central Florida, 3 for 11. Against Tennessee, 5 for 1. The one nice day he had was against Kentucky, 9 for 46. Not great, but not bad. And then against Georgia, 4 for 18 before the injury. So he's had one game, the game against Kentucky, where he rushed 9 times for 46 yards. That is a far cry, when he's healthy, from what Jalen Milroe and Marcel Reed were able to do to you. And I don't even know that DJ Lagway is going to be able to go because of that hamstring injury. And if he does, how effective will he be? So either you're going to face a banged-up DJ Lagway who could barely move, or you're going to face Aiden Warner, who is just not ready to play at the SEC level. This is one of those days for the LSU defense that should look a lot better, like you did against Connor Wegman and Texas A&M, like you did in the second half against Jackson Dart and Ole Miss when you held them out of the end zone, like you did against Arkansas where you suffocated them for 4 quarters, like you did in the second half against UCLA where you allowed 89 total yards of offense in the second half. The point is, we have seen LSU's defense play well at times, but it's very specific with what you're facing. If it's a running quarterback, not good. Everything else, you fared pretty well because of your ability to stop the run on the interior, your ability to cover, and your ability to pressure the quarterback. This could be one of those weekends where you see a nice bounce back from LSU, not because LSU is markedly better, but because Florida offensively isn't positioned to be able to take advantage of where LSU is weakest. So we will clearly be watching DJ Lagway's progress throughout this week. Wednesday on the SEC Coaches Teleconference, no doubt Billy Napier will give an update, and then he'll have to release the injury report via the league, the participation injury report, so I'll have a much better sense of DJ Lagway's availability by the time we get to Saturday's game. But considering what's on the line for LSU, Saturday's game, it feels like, took on a massive new level of importance. This weekend, you are LSU Tiger fans, you are Georgia Bulldog fans, and in a few weeks, you're going to be saying Woo Pig Suey cheering for Arkansas against Missouri. We'll be following it all the way along right here. Hey, thanks so much for making us your first listen every day. We're free, available wherever you get podcasts. If you're on podcast, please subscribe on your favorite podcast app. Rate us, leave a review. If you're on YouTube, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so you're notified whenever we post a new video. And please let a friend know if they love the Tigers. We got you here every single day for Locked on LSU, your team every day.